Maria had always loved the smell of motor oil and the sound of engines running smooth. Growing up as the only daughter of a truck driver, she spent countless hours in her dad's garage, watching him fix everything from broken lawnmowers to 18-wheelers. When she was just 12 years old, she could already change a tire faster than most adults. By 16, she was rebuilding transmissions like it was second nature. Now, at 32, Maria owned the only auto repair shop in Cedar Valley, a small town tucked away in the desert of southern Arizona. The town wasn't much to look at, just a main street with a diner, a gas station, a post office, and her shop. Most folks drove through without stopping, but the locals knew Maria's place was special. Her shop sat on the corner of Main Street and Highway 9 with a faded blue sign that read, Valley Auto Repair in bold white letters. The building itself was nothing fancy. It used to be an old Texaco station back in the 70s, and Maria had bought it cheap when the previous owner retired. She kept the original garage doors and added her own touch. Flower boxes under the windows and a small waiting area with comfortable chairs and free coffee. The locals appreciated these little details. It made the place feel more like a friend's garage than a cold business. On this particular Tuesday morning in July, the desert heat was already brutal by 9 o'clock. The thermometer outside Maria's office window read 98 degrees, and it wasn't even noon yet. She had her long black hair tied back in a ponytail and wore her usual work clothes, faded jeans, steel-toed boots, and a blue work shirt with Maria embroidered on the pocket. She was just finishing up an oil change on Mrs. Henderson's old Honda Civic when she heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel outside. Through the open garage door, she could see a black sedan pulling into her small parking lot. The car looked expensive, too expensive for most folks in Cedar Valley. Its windows were tinted dark, and the paint job was so perfect it looked like it had just rolled off a showroom floor. Maria wiped her hands on a rag and walked toward the car as it came to a stop near the front entrance. The engine shut off, and for a moment everything was quiet except for the distant hum of the air conditioner inside her shop. Then the driver's door opened, and out stepped a man who definitely wasn't from around these parts. He was tall, probably 6 feet or more, with broad shoulders and the kind of straight-backed posture that screamed military training. His hair was cut short and neat, graying slightly at the temples. He wore civilian clothes, khaki pants and a plain white polo shirt, but something about the way he carried himself made it clear he was used to giving orders and having them followed. "Good morning," he said, walking toward Maria with confident steps. His voice was deep and authoritative, the kind of voice that expected attention. "Are you the owner of this establishment?" Maria nodded, still holding the oily rag in her hands. "That's me. What can I do for you?" The man extended his hand for a handshake. His grip was firm, maybe a little too firm. "Colonel Patterson," he said. "I'm stationed at the military installation about 40 miles north of here. I've been having some trouble with my vehicle, and several people in town mentioned you were the best mechanic around." Maria glanced back at the black sedan. It was a newer model, probably only a few years old. She didn't recognize the exact make and model, but it looked like the kind of car that shouldn't be having major problems. "What kind of trouble are you having, Colonel?" "Strange noises," he replied, walking back toward the car. "Started about a week ago. It's been getting worse. The engine makes this grinding sound, especially when I accelerate. I'm concerned it might be something serious." Maria followed him to the front of the vehicle. "Mind if I take a look?" "Please do," Colonel Patterson said, popping the hood release from inside the car. As the hood lifted up, Maria immediately noticed something that made her pause. The engine bay was clean, too clean. Most cars, even well-maintained ones, showed some signs of normal wear and dirt accumulation. This engine looked like it had been scrubbed spotless recently, which was unusual for someone just bringing their car in for repairs. She leaned in closer to examine the engine components. What she saw next made her stomach drop. Someone had clearly been tampering with this engine, and they hadn't done a very good job of hiding it. Several bolts were loose, but not in the way they would be from normal wear and tear. These had been deliberately loosened and then partially tightened again. There were fresh scratches on metal surfaces where someone had used tools recently. Most telling of all, she could see where someone had damaged a belt, and then tried to make it look like natural wear. "Colonel," Maria said, straightening up and looking him in the eye. "When did you say these problems started?" "About a week ago," he repeated, but now she noticed he wouldn't meet her gaze directly. Maria said, leaning back under the hood. The more she looked, the more obvious it became. This wasn't mechanical failure. This was sabotage, and poorly executed sabotage at that. Someone had deliberately damaged this engine to create problems, but they'd tried to make it look accidental. The question was why. She spent another few minutes examining different parts of the engine, her mind racing. In her 8 years of running this shop, she'd seen all kinds of mechanical problems. She knew the difference between parts that failed naturally and parts that had been tampered with. This engine had definitely been tampered with, and recently. "Well?" Colonel Patterson asked, his voice carrying a note of impatience. "What's your assessment?" Maria stood up and wiped her hands again, thinking carefully about how to respond. Something about this whole situation felt wrong. The too clean engine, the obvious signs of tampering, the Colonel's nervous energy. It all added up to something she didn't want to be involved in. "Colonel," she said finally, "I can see there are definitely some issues here. But to be honest, I'm backed up with work right now. I've got 3 other cars ahead of you, and I'm not sure I could get to this for at least a week, maybe longer." The Colonel's friendly expression faltered slightly. "I see. Well, surely you could make an exception. This is rather urgent." "I understand. It's urgent," Maria replied. "But I have commitments to other customers. There's another shop about 20 miles east on the highway, Rodriguez Auto. They might be able to help you sooner." For just a moment, the Colonel's mask slipped completely. Maria saw something in his eyes that made her take an unconscious step backward. It wasn't anger exactly, but something colder and more calculating. Then just as quickly, the friendly smile returned. "I'd really prefer to have the work done here," he said. "I've heard excellent things about your shop. Perhaps we could work out some kind of arrangement." The way he said arrangement made Maria's skin crawl. She'd grown up around military men. Her uncle had served in the Marines, and her high school boyfriend had been in the Army. She knew how real military officers conducted themselves, and this didn't feel right. Something was off about Colonel Patterson, and every instinct she had was telling her to stay as far away from this situation as possible. "I'm sorry, Colonel," she said firmly. "I really can't take on any new work right now. Rodriguez Auto is a good shop. I'm sure they'll take care of you." The Colonel stared at her for a long moment, and Maria could feel the temperature in the garage drop despite the heat outside. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost all pretense of friendliness. "That's unfortunate," he said quietly. "I was hoping we could handle this the easy way." The silence that followed Colonel Patterson's words hung in the air like smoke. Maria felt her heart rate pick up, but she kept her expression calm. She'd dealt with difficult customers before, but something about this man's tone made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. "I'm not sure what you mean by the easy way," Maria said, keeping her voice steady. "Like I said, I'm just booked up right now. It's nothing personal." Colonel Patterson took a step closer, and Maria noticed he was blocking her path back toward the garage. It wasn't obvious. Someone watching from a distance might think he was just casually moving around, but Maria felt trapped. She glanced toward the open garage door, calculating how quickly she could get there if she needed to. "Let me be more specific about the problem," the Colonel said, his voice taking on a different quality. Gone was any pretense of being a regular customer asking for help. Now he sounded like someone used to getting his way. "This vehicle needs some modifications. Nothing major, just some adjustments to the electrical system. Should take you maybe 2 hours, 3 at most." Maria's stomach dropped. Modifications to the electrical system weren't repair work. They were alterations. And given the obvious tampering she'd already seen under the hood, she was starting to understand that this wasn't about fixing anything. This was about installing something. "Colonel, I don't do modifications," she said firmly. "I fix broken cars. If you need custom work done, you'll need to find a specialty shop." "Oh, but you misunderstand," Patterson said, and now his smile was cold. This isn't custom work, this is standard repair work. At least that's what the paperwork will say. You're going to fix some wiring problems, replace a few components, standard maintenance items. Nothing unusual at all. The pieces were falling into place now, and Maria didn't like the picture they were forming. Someone had deliberately damaged this car's engine to create a cover story. They wanted her to repair it, but what they really wanted was for her to install something while she had access to the vehicle. The question was what and why they needed a paper trail showing legitimate repair work. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Maria said, taking a small step to the side, trying to get a better angle toward the garage. "I only do honest repair work. If your car doesn't actually need repairs, then I can't help you." Patterson's expression darkened. "Let me explain something to you, Miss Rodriguez. Sometimes in life, we all have to do things we might not completely understand. The important thing is cooperation. People who cooperate tend to find that life runs much more smoothly for them." The threat wasn't even subtle anymore. Maria felt anger rising in her chest, pushing back against the fear. She'd worked too hard building this business to let some stranger with a fake friendly smile intimidate her into doing something illegal. "And let me explain something to you, Colonel," she said, her voice getting stronger. "This is my shop, on my property. I decide what work I do and don't do, and I'm telling you I don't do the kind of work you're looking for." For a moment, Patterson's mask slipped completely. Maria saw rage flash across his features, quickly followed by something that looked like calculation. He was weighing options, deciding how far to push this. "You know," he said, his voice now conversational again, "running a small business is complicated these days. So many regulations, so many ways things can go wrong. Take environmental regulations, for example. The EPA is very strict about how automotive shops dispose of used oil, coolant, other hazardous materials. One small violation, and they can shut you down permanently." Maria's blood ran cold. She was meticulous about following environmental regulations, but she also knew that with enough motivation, inspectors could find violations anywhere. A drop of oil in the wrong place, paperwork filed a day late, storage containers that weren't perfectly labeled. There were dozens of ways a business could be shut down if someone really wanted to make it happen. "Then there's OSHA," Patterson continued, warming to his subject. "Workplace safety is so important. The wrong person makes a complaint about unsafe working conditions, and suddenly you're looking at surprise inspections, hefty fines, maybe even criminal charges if they decide you've been willfully negligent." He was walking around her now, not threatening her physically, but making it clear he was in control of the conversation. Maria forced herself to stay still, not to back away or show fear. "And of course," Patterson said, "there's always the question of proper business licensing. I'm sure all your paperwork is in order, but sometimes these small towns don't keep the best records. Documents get lost, deadlines get missed. It would be such a shame if there were questions about whether your business license was actually valid." Maria thought about her business license, safely filed in her office cabinet. She knew it was current, but Patterson was right about small-town record-keeping. If someone with enough authority wanted to claim there was a problem with her paperwork, it could take weeks or months to sort out, and in the meantime, her shop could be closed. "You're threatening me," she said quietly. "Threatening?" Patterson looked genuinely surprised. "Not at all. I'm just making conversation about the challenges small business owners face. I'd hate for you to encounter any of these problems, especially when avoiding them would be so simple." He stopped, directly in front of her again, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with something else. Gun oil, maybe, or the particular scent that clung to people who spent time around military equipment. "All I need is for you to do some simple repair work," he said. "Replace a few parts, clean up some wiring, document everything properly for insurance purposes. Standard automotive repair work. You do the work, you get paid well for it, and everyone goes home happy. No complications, no problems with regulatory agencies, no questions asked." Maria's mind was racing. She could see exactly what was happening here. This man wanted her to provide cover for something illegal by creating legitimate-looking repair records. Whatever he wanted installed in that car, he needed a paper trail showing it was just normal maintenance work, done by a licensed mechanic. The smart thing, the safe thing, would probably be to agree. Do whatever work he wanted, take his money, and hope he never came back. But Maria thought about her father, who had taught her that your word and your integrity were the only things nobody could take away from you. She thought about the military men in her family, who had served their country honorably and would be ashamed to see someone using military rank to intimidate innocent people. No, she said simply. Patterson blinked, as if he hadn't heard her correctly. Excuse me? I said no. Maria repeated louder this time. I don't know what you're really asking me to do, but I know it's not legitimate car repair. And I don't do work that isn't legitimate. So the answer is no. The colonel stared at her for a long moment, and Maria could practically see him recalculating. He'd clearly expected intimidation to work. Most people, faced with threats to their livelihood, would have caved by now. You're making a mistake, he said finally, his voice very quiet and very cold. Maybe, Maria said. But it's my mistake to make. Patterson nodded slowly, as if filing this information away for future use. Then, without another word, he walked back to his car, got in, and started the engine. As he backed out of her parking lot, Maria caught a glimpse of his face through the windshield. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked like someone making plans. Maria stood in her garage for a long time after the black sedan disappeared down Highway 9, trying to calm her racing heart and wondering what she'd just gotten herself into. The rest of Tuesday passed in a strange blur for Maria. She tried to focus on her work, but every time she heard a car pull up outside, her heart would jump. She kept expecting to see that black sedan come rolling back into her parking lot, but it never did. By closing time, she was exhausted from the constant state of alert she'd been in all day. She locked up the shop just after 6 o'clock, double-checking the deadbolt and making sure all the windows were secure. The sun was setting behind the desert hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful any other day. Tonight, though, Maria barely noticed. She was too busy scanning the empty street for any sign of trouble. Her small house was only 3 blocks from the shop, a tiny adobe structure she'd bought when she first moved to Cedar Valley. It had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen barely big enough for 1 person, but it was hers. She'd painted the walls herself, planted the little garden in front, and fixed every creaky floorboard and leaky faucet. It was the first place that had ever really felt like home. As she pulled into her driveway, Maria noticed a car parked across the street that she didn't recognize. It was a dark blue sedan, newer model, with tinted windows. There was someone sitting in the driver's seat, just sitting there, not moving. In a town as small as Cedar Valley, strange cars stood out, especially ones with people just sitting in them for no apparent reason. Maria parked her truck and walked quickly to her front door, trying not to look back at the car. She fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking slightly as she tried to get the door unlocked. Once inside, she immediately went to her living room window and peeked through the curtains. The car was still there, and whoever was inside was definitely watching her house. She stepped back from the window, her mind racing. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe someone was lost, or waiting for directions, or having car trouble. But, deep down, she knew better. This had something to do with Colonel Patterson and their confrontation earlier that day. Maria tried to go about her normal evening routine. She made herself a simple dinner of scrambled eggs and toast, but found she couldn't eat more than a few bites. She turned on the television but couldn't concentrate on any of the programs. Every few minutes, she found herself back at the window, checking to see if the car was still there. It always was. Around 9 o'clock, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize with a local area code. For a moment, she considered not answering, but curiosity got the better of her. "Hello?" she said cautiously. "Maria Rodriguez?" The voice was male, unfamiliar, and very businesslike. "Who's asking?" "This is Inspector Davis from the Environmental Protection Agency. We've received some complaints about improper disposal of hazardous materials at your automotive repair facility. We'll need to schedule an inspection as soon as possible. Maria's blood ran cold. What kind of complaints? I'm not at liberty to discuss the specifics over the phone, Davis replied. But I can tell you they're serious enough to warrant immediate attention. Can you be at your facility tomorrow morning at 8 a.m.? Yes, I suppose so, Maria stammered. But I follow all environmental regulations. I don't understand what this could be about. That's what the inspection will determine, Davis said curtly. 8 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. The line went dead, leaving Maria staring at her phone in disbelief. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. Less than 12 hours after she'd refused Colonel Patterson's demands, she was getting calls about EPA violations. The threats he'd made earlier suddenly felt very real. She walked back to the window and looked out again. The blue sedan was gone, but somehow that made her feel worse, not better. At least when she could see it, she knew where the threat was. Now it could be anywhere. Maria barely slept that night. Every sound outside made her jump. The neighbor's cat walking across her porch, the wind rattling her mailbox, a car driving. Passed on the street. She kept her phone on the nightstand, ready to call 911 if she needed to, but she wasn't even sure what she would tell them. Nobody had actually done anything to her yet, not technically. Wednesday morning came gray and overcast, unusual for the desert in July. Maria got dressed in her best clothes, clean jeans and a polo shirt instead of her usual work clothes. If she was going to be inspected, she wanted to look professional and prepared. She arrived at her shop 30 minutes early, wanting to make sure everything was perfect before the inspector arrived. At exactly 8 o'clock, a white government van pulled into her parking lot. A man in his 50s got out wearing a suit. Despite the heat and carrying a clipboard and camera, he introduced himself as Inspector Davis, the same man who had called her the night before. "Let's get started," he said without any pleasantries. "I'll need to see all your hazardous waste disposal records, storage area, and disposal procedures." For the next 3 hours, Inspector Davis went through her shop with a fine-tooth comb. He photographed everything, took samples of her used oil, examined every container and storage area. He questioned her about every aspect of her waste disposal procedures, taking notes constantly. Maria had always been careful about following environmental regulations. She kept meticulous records, used only approved disposal methods, and stored everything properly. But as the inspection dragged on, she began to realize that it didn't matter how careful she'd been. Inspector Davis wasn't looking for actual violations. He was looking for anything he could twist into a violation. He found fault with the way she labeled one container of used brake fluid, claiming the writing wasn't clear enough. He questioned whether her oil storage area had adequate secondary containment, even though it clearly met all requirements. He took issue with the date on one disposal receipt, suggesting it might have been altered, even though it obviously hadn't been. "This is highly irregular," he said, making notes on his clipboard. "I'm seeing multiple potential violations here." "What violations?" Maria asked, trying to keep the frustration out of her voice. "I follow every regulation to the letter." "That's not what my inspection is showing," Davis replied coldly. "I'll need to file a full report. You should expect to hear from our enforcement division within the next few days." After he left, Maria sat in her office chair feeling defeated. She knew the inspection had been a sham, but there was nothing she could do about it. Davis would file his report, and some bureaucrat in a distant office would decide her fate based on twisted interpretations of minor paperwork issues. Around noon, her phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed OSHA Compliance Division. "Miss Rodriguez? This is Agent Thompson from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. We've received reports of unsafe working conditions at your facility. We need to schedule an inspection immediately." Maria's heart sank. It was happening exactly as Colonel Patterson had predicted. One agency after another, all finding reasons to investigate her shop, all threatening to shut her down unless she played along. "When would you like to schedule this inspection?" she asked wearily. "How about tomorrow morning?" Thompson suggested. "Say, 9 a.m.? "Fine," Maria said. There was no point in fighting it. They were going to keep coming until she either gave in or went out of business. That afternoon, while she was trying to work on a customer's car, a man in a business suit walked into her shop. He introduced himself as an investigator from the county licensing department there to verify that all her business permits were in order. Maria spent another hour producing paperwork and answering questions about documentation that had been perfectly acceptable for years. By the time evening came, Maria felt like she was drowning. 3 different government agencies in 2 days, all finding problems that had never existed before. The message was crystal clear. Cooperate with Colonel Patterson, or watch your business get buried under an avalanche of bureaucratic harassment. As she locked up the shop that night, Maria noticed the blue sedan was back, parked in the same spot across from her house. This time, she didn't even pretend not to see it. She walked straight to her truck, got in, and drove home, checking her rearview mirror the whole way. The sedan followed her, staying just far enough back to maintain the pretense that it wasn't really following her. Inside her house, Maria sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands. She thought about her father, who had taught her to stand up for what was right no matter the cost. She thought about her business, 8 years of hard work that could disappear with the stroke of a bureaucrat's pen. And she thought about Colonel Patterson, who had started this whole nightmare with his threats and demands. The smart thing would be to call him, agree to do whatever work he wanted, and hope this all went away. But Maria knew it wouldn't end there. Once she crossed that line, there would be no going back. She would become the kind of person who looked the other way when something was wrong, who traded her integrity for safety. Outside, she could see the blue sedan still parked across the street, a constant reminder that her troubles were just beginning. Thursday morning started like any other day, but Maria could feel the tension in the air before she even got out of bed. She'd barely slept again, listening to every sound outside her window. The blue sedan had finally left around 3 in the morning, but she knew it would be back. She arrived at her shop early, hoping to get some actual work done before whatever new harassment awaited her. Mrs. Peterson's old pickup truck needed new brake pads, and Bobby Chen had dropped off his motorcycle for a tune-up. These were her regular customers, people who trusted her work and paid their bills on time. She wanted to take care of them before her world got turned upside down again. At exactly 9 o'clock, as promised, Agent Thompson from OSHA arrived in a government sedan. He was a thin man in his 40s with wire-rimmed glasses and a clipboard that seemed permanently attached to his hand. Unlike Inspector Davis from the EPA, Thompson at least tried to be polite, but Maria could tell he was just as determined to find problems. "Good morning, Miss Rodriguez," he said, shaking her hand. "I appreciate you making time for this inspection. I know it's an inconvenience, but workplace safety is something we take very seriously." "Of course," Maria replied, forcing a smile. "What exactly are you looking for?" "We received reports of unsafe working conditions," Thompson said, consulting his clipboard. "Improper storage of hazardous materials, inadequate safety equipment, potential violations of ventilation requirements. Standard stuff, really, but we have to check it out." Maria led him around her shop, pointing out her safety equipment, ventilation systems, and storage areas. She'd always been careful about workplace safety. She'd seen too many mechanics get hurt over the years to take chances. Her first aid kit was fully stocked and current. Her fire extinguishers were properly maintained, and she had safety signs posted everywhere they needed to be. But just like Inspector Davis the day before, Thompson found fault with everything. Her safety goggles weren't stored in exactly the right location. One of her warning signs was slightly faded and might not be clearly visible in certain lighting conditions. Her ventilation system, while perfectly functional, was an older model that might not meet the newest standards. "This is concerning," Thompson said, making notes. "I'm seeing multiple potential safety violations here. Your employees could be at serious risk." "I don't have any employees," Maria pointed out. "It's just me." "That doesn't matter," Thompson replied. "Safety standards apply regardless of business size. You could still face significant fines and mandatory corrections." The inspection lasted 4 hours. 4 hours of having every aspect of her business scrutinized and criticized. 4 hours of being made to feel like a criminal for running an honest shop. By the time Thompson left, Maria felt completely drained. She tried to get back to work on Mrs. Peterson's truck, but her hands were shaking too badly to properly handle the tools. She sat down in her office chair and put her head in her hands, fighting back tears of frustration and exhaustion. That's when she heard the vehicles pulling up outside. Maria looked up through her office window and felt her heart stop. 3 military vehicles had just parked in front of her shop, 2 jeeps and what looked like a command truck. Soldiers in full combat uniforms were getting out, and one of them was carrying a clipboard and some kind of official-looking documents. For a moment, Maria couldn't move. She just sat there staring as the soldiers organized themselves outside her shop. Then training kicked in, the same survival instincts that had kept her safe growing up in a rough neighborhood. She grabbed her phone and quickly snapped photos through the window, then sent them to her brother Carlos with a text message. "Army at my shop. Something's wrong. If you don't hear from me in 2 hours, call the police." A young lieutenant appeared in her doorway. He looked barely old enough to be out of high school, with short blonde hair and nervous eyes. "Ma'am, are you Maria Rodriguez, owner of this establishment?" "Yes," Maria said, standing up slowly. "What's this about?" "We have authorization to conduct a compliance inspection of your facility," the lieutenant said, handing her a folder full of official documents. "This is related to environmental safety protocols for businesses operating within 50 miles of military installations." Maria took the folder with trembling hands. The documents looked official enough, lots of government seals and formal language, but something about them felt off. The letterhead was slightly wrong and some of the wording seemed awkward, like it had been copied from other documents and pieced together. "I've never heard of this type of inspection," Maria said. "It's a new requirement," the lieutenant replied. "Post 9/11 security measures. We need to verify that local businesses aren't inadvertently creating environmental hazards that could affect base operations." Behind the lieutenant, Maria could see other soldiers setting up what looked like a command post in her parking lot. They had tables, computers, and equipment she didn't recognize. Whatever this was, they were planning to be here for a while. "How long will this take?" Maria asked. "That depends on what we find," the lieutenant said. "Could be a few hours, could be longer. We'll need to examine all your equipment, take samples, review your records, standard procedure." What followed was the most thorough and intimidating inspection Maria had ever experienced. The soldiers went through her shop like they were searching for weapons of mass destruction. They photographed every tool, every piece of equipment, every container of fluid. They took samples of her motor oil, brake fluid, antifreeze, and cleaning solvents. They measured the dimensions of her storage areas and tested the air quality with electronic devices. But the worst part was that they wouldn't let her serve customers. Every time someone pulled up to her shop, the soldiers would politely but firmly explain that the business was temporarily closed for inspection. Maria watched helplessly as Mrs. Peterson drove away without getting her brakes fixed, and Bobby Chen had to take his motorcycle to another shop 20 miles away. The lieutenant, who introduced himself as Lieutenant Hayes, seemed genuinely uncomfortable with the whole situation. Maria got the impression that he was just following orders and didn't really understand what they were looking for. "Ma'am," he said during a brief break in the inspection, "is there anything specific you think we should know about your operations here? Any unusual materials or procedures?" Maria looked into his young, earnest face and realized he had no idea what this was really about. He thought this was a legitimate inspection, not part of Colonel Patterson's campaign of harassment. "Lieutenant," she said carefully, "do you know Colonel Patterson?" Hayes's expression changed immediately. "Yes, ma'am, he's the one who ordered this inspection. Said there might be security concerns related to your facility." "What kind of security concerns?" "I'm not really sure," Hayes admitted. "The colonel just said it was important to check everything thoroughly, make sure there were no problems that could affect base security." Maria felt a chill run down her spine. Colonel Patterson wasn't just harassing her anymore. He was using military resources to do it. That meant either he had convinced his superiors that she was a real threat, or he was acting on his own authority and abusing his position. The inspection continued for 6 more hours. 6 hours of having her business treated like a crime scene, of watching potential customers drive away, of being made to feel like a suspect in some invisible crime. The soldiers were professional and polite, but their presence was overwhelming. Every neighbor who walked by stopped to stare and wonder what terrible thing Maria must have done to warrant military attention. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Lieutenant Hayes seemed to be running out of things to inspect. Maria could tell he was frustrated. They clearly hadn't found whatever they were supposed to find, and he was starting to question the whole operation. "Ma'am," he said finally, "I need to ask you directly. Are you storing any unusual materials here? Anything that might not be typical for an automotive repair shop?" "No," Maria said firmly. "Just standard automotive fluids and supplies. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous, nothing that would interest the military." Hayes nodded slowly. "That's what our tests are showing too. Everything appears to be normal automotive repair materials." He walked away to make a phone call, and Maria could hear him speaking in low tones to someone on the other end. She caught fragments of the conversation. "No violations found. Standard automotive business. Recommend closing the inspection." But then his tone changed. Maria heard him say, "Yes, sir," several times, followed by a long pause. When he came back, he looked even more uncomfortable than before. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to remain available for the rest of the day," he said. "We may need to expand the scope of this inspection." Maria's heart sank. It was clear that Colonel Patterson wasn't satisfied with the results so far. He wanted the harassment to continue, regardless of what the inspection actually found. As the afternoon wore on, more vehicles arrived. First came a truck from the county health department, then a van from the state fire marshal's office. Each new arrival brought more officials with clipboards, more questions, more ways to find fault with her business. Maria stood in the middle of her shop, surrounded by people in uniforms and official badges, all looking for reasons to shut her down. By 7 o'clock that evening, Maria's shop looked like a disaster zone. Officials from 6 different agencies had trampled through every corner of her business, leaving behind a mess of overturned equipment, scattered paperwork, and sample containers. The soldiers were finally packing up their equipment, but the damage was done. Word had spread through Cedar Valley that something serious was happening at Maria's shop, and she knew her reputation might never recover. Lieutenant Hayes approached her as the last of the military vehicles prepared to leave. He looked exhausted and confused, like a man who'd spent the day following orders that didn't make sense. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I want you to know that we didn't find anything wrong with your operation here. Your business appears to be completely legitimate and properly run." "Then why did this happen?" Maria asked, gesturing at the chaos around them. Hayes glanced around to make sure no one else was listening, then stepped closer. "Between you and me, I think there might be some miscommunication happening here. Colonel Patterson seemed very sure there would be problems, but..." He shrugged helplessly. "Sometimes intelligence reports aren't as accurate as we'd like them to be." After the military convoy pulled away, Maria stood alone in her destroyed shop, fighting back tears. She'd lost an entire day of business, and who knew how many customers would be scared away by what they'd witnessed? Her reputation in this small town might be ruined forever. That's when her phone rang. The caller ID showed her brother Carlos calling from Phoenix. "Maria, what the hell is going on?" Carlos's voice was tight with worry. "I got your text about the army being at your shop. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Maria said, though she didn't feel fine at all. "But Carlos, I think I'm in serious trouble, and I don't know what to do." She told him the whole story. Colonel Patterson, the suspicious car, the harassment from multiple government agencies, and finally the military inspection. Carlos listened without interrupting, and Maria could practically hear his mind working through the details. "This isn't random harassment," Carlos said finally. "This is coordinated, which means someone with serious authority is behind it. Tell me more about this Colonel Patterson. What exactly did he want you to do?" Maria described the sabotaged engine, Patterson's request for modifications, and his threats about regulatory problems. As she talked, she could hear Carlos typing on his computer. "Maria, I'm looking up this Colonel Patterson right now," Carlos said. "James Patterson, stationed at Fort Mitchell, about 40 miles from you. And guess what? He's been in the news recently, but not in a good way." "What do you mean?" "There's been rumors for months about some kind of investigation into defense contractors and military personnel involved in illegal technology transfers. Nothing official, but the kind of talk that happens when military intelligence is quietly looking into something big." Maria felt her heart racing. "You think Patterson is involved in something like that?" "I think," Carlos said carefully, "that you might have accidentally stumbled into something much bigger than a corrupt officer trying to intimidate a local business owner. If Patterson is under investigation, and he wanted you to help him with some kind of cover-up, then your refusal might have really panicked him." Carlos paused, and Maria could hear more typing. "Maria, I'm going to make some calls. I still have contacts from my MP days, people who might know what's really going on. In the meantime, you need to document everything that's happened. Write down every detail you can remember, keep copies of all those inspection reports, and whatever you do, don't talk to Patterson if he contacts you again." "Carlos, I'm scared," Maria admitted. "What if this doesn't stop? What if they keep coming after me until I lose everything?" "They won't," Carlos said firmly. "Because if my suspicions are right, Patterson is about to have much bigger problems than one stubborn mechanic in Arizona." The next morning, Maria arrived at her shop to find it surprisingly quiet. No government vehicles, no inspectors, no soldiers. Just her normal, peaceful business on a normal Friday morning. She spent the day cleaning up the mess from the previous day's inspections and trying to salvage what she could of her schedule. Around noon, Mrs. Henderson stopped by with her Honda Civic. "Maria, honey, are you okay?" she asked. "The whole town's been talking about what happened yesterday. People are saying all kinds of crazy things." "I'm fine, Mrs. Henderson," Maria said. "Just some misunderstanding with government paperwork. It's all sorted out now." But even as she said it, Maria wasn't sure if that was true. The harassment had stopped as suddenly as it had started, which was almost more unsettling than the harassment itself. In her experience, bullies didn't usually give up that easily. Her answer came that afternoon when Carlos called back. "Maria, you're not going to believe this," he said, excitement clear in his voice. "Remember how I said I was going to make some calls? Well, one of those calls was to a friend of mine who works in military intelligence. He couldn't tell me much over the phone, but he did say that there's been a major development in an ongoing investigation." "What kind of development?" "The kind that involves arrests and charges being filed," Carlos said. "Apparently, your Colonel Patterson was part of a scheme to steal and sell military technology to foreign buyers. They were using civilian businesses to create fake paper trails and hide their activities." Maria felt like the ground was shifting under her feet. "So when he wanted me to do those modifications, you would have been installing stolen military communication equipment into what was probably a delivery vehicle," Carlos explained. "The repair records would have made it look legitimate, and you would have become an unwitting accomplice in espionage." "Oh my God," Maria whispered. "It gets better," Carlos continued. "When you refused to cooperate, Patterson panicked and tried to use his position to force you into compliance. But all that harassment, all those fake inspections, they created a paper trail that military investigators were able to follow. Your resistance actually helped them build their case." Maria sat down heavily in her office chair. "So it's over?" "According to my contact, Patterson and several other conspirators were arrested this morning. The whole operation has been shut down. You're not just safe, Maria, you're a hero. You helped stop a major security breach just by refusing to compromise your principles." The next week passed in a blur of phone calls from federal agents, interviews with military investigators, and visits from reporters who had somehow gotten wind of the story. Maria found herself being described as a patriotic small business owner who helped uncover a military espionage ring in newspapers across the state. Real validation came when Lieutenant Hayes stopped by her shop one afternoon, this time in civilian clothes and driving his own car. "Ma'am," he said, "I wanted to apologize for that inspection last week. I had no idea what we were really doing there, I thought we were following legitimate orders. You were just doing your job, Maria said. I don't blame you for that. Well, I wanted you to know that the real army, the legitimate chain of command, is grateful for what you did. By refusing to be intimidated, you helped us identify and stop a serious threat to national security. Hayes handed her an envelope. This is from my commanding officer. It's not much, but it's his way of saying thank you. Inside the envelope was a letter of commendation from the base commander, thanking Maria for her courage and integrity in the face of criminal intimidation. It wasn't an official military decoration, but it was signed by a real colonel and meant more to Maria than any amount of money could have. As the weeks passed, Maria's business returned to normal. Better than normal, actually. The story of her courage had spread throughout the region, and customers were driving from 50 miles away to have their cars repaired by the mechanic who had stood up to corruption and helped catch spies. Mrs. Henderson summed it up best when she stopped by for an oil change. "Maria, honey," she said, "my husband always said you were the most honest mechanic he'd ever met. But now we know you're not just honest, you're brave. This town is lucky to have you." Standing in her shop that afternoon, surrounded by the familiar sounds of engines and the smell of motor oil, Maria thought about her father's words about integrity being the one thing nobody could take away from you. He'd been right, as usual. When everything was on the line, her principles had been the only thing that mattered. And in the end, doing the right thing had saved not just her business, but helped protect her country too.